Hello and welcome, friends. Welcome back to another Fearless Friday chat. I am so excited to be with you this morning or this afternoon or whenever you're watching this because I have two phenomenal guests. Both of them's names are Tony. I have Tony Patterson and I also have Tony Newton. But they are going to be sharing with you today on a topic that I find very interesting and relevant given what we're facing in our country right now, and that is race as it relates to church. And so they're going to be sharing from their experiences. We'll be having a conversation about what this means for us right now. We've been talking in previous conversations about George Floyd's death and a little bit of the Black Lives Matter movement, and then what that's meant for us as Americans and how we're moving forward, how faith has affected our response. And so today is just another opportunity for you to hear some stories of people who are experiencing life perhaps a little bit differently than you are. So again, without further ado, I want to share my guests with you, and we'll begin to talk about this very pertinent topic. So welcome friends. We have Tony Patterson. I'm going to let him take a minute to introduce himself, followed by Tony Newton, who will then introduce himself.
Well, thank you, Jalessa, for having me here today. I'm excited about the conversation. For those of you out there who are watching today, I am Tony Patterson, Antonio Patterson, and I am the brother-in-law of Jalessa and good friend of Tony Newton. We've known each other, crossed paths several times. So my background, I can't say that I come from one specific background. I was raised in a military family. So we moved around quite a bit, been around a lot of different types of people, different cultures, different parts of the country. My background is science. I was a science major in college, but I also have a background in theology. Went into ministry in my early 20s, served different roles at many different churches. Ultimately became a senior pastor and planted a church in Mississippi. Have started mentoring programs for teenagers, and so done a lot of different things and been in a lot of different spaces in my life. And those experiences, I think, have given me a little bit of gravity and latitude, if you will, to speak on this subject today. So I'm glad to be here and to maybe enlighten the audience today on some things that they may not see from their perspective. So I'm just going to end it there, and we'll discuss a little bit more as we go along.
All right, I'm Tony Newton. My background is art, and I'm currently a graphic designer and photographer and have been for a number of years. And I know both of them a long time, both of the others a long, long time, many years, and their families. And my background, even though it's art, I used my gift in church circles a lot. So I have my own design company also, and most of 90% of my clients are actually churches and ministries. And I also work for one of the largest Christian retail companies in the world, and I'm one of the graphic designers. So I'm from that perspective also. And part of my graphic design, I was also on staff for a few years at a multicultural church for several years also. And so I would hope to speak to what's going on today, and especially from a Christian standpoint of the things I see. And even in my office, I'm the only African-American guy there, and what that brings to it when you mix the Christianity and the reality of what's around you every day. And so I have traveled and the whole bit, and I was always passionate about meeting other people and other cultures and things. And so I purposely wanted to learn from other people and learn things that I didn't necessarily grow up with or in the neighborhoods I grew up with. And it has enriched my life and broadened my thinking and horizon on, because I made that decision to know other people and to really understand other people and not just rely on what the media showed me about those people.
Right.
Yeah. So as we continue to talk about faith and church, we know that there's different types of churches. different denominations, obviously, but there's been always been said that on any given Sunday, the most segregated place you would go is to the church, which almost seems like an oxymoron because you would think that wouldn't be the case. And so, in light of George Floyd's death, what attention or what awareness do you believe that's brought perhaps to race or racism in church?
Well, I can speak on that because I did grow up in church, and coming from a military background, I didn't necessarily grow up in a black church. Of course, when you're in the military base, there's mostly Catholic churches or Episcopal churches or Methodist churches, and those are predominantly white. And so, as a child, I never really had, the attitude that church was supposed to be for a certain race. I just thought it was
Mm.
church. We went to church together. We sang songs together. It wasn't until I got older that I saw the dichotomy of churches, that there are black churches and white churches. There are black Catholic churches and white Catholic churches. And I really didn't understand that until I got older. I think, when you're younger, you're kind of naive about some of those things, and your innocence is taken away as you get older, and you learn, the world view. And so the churches that you think would have a Christian worldview don't really have a Christian worldview, because the culture really dictates who goes to what church, And in the United States, of course, we've had this racial division since the inception of this country, and you see that, like you said, every Sunday morning, where it shouldn't be in churches, because church is supposed to be a culture of people. It's supposed to be a culture of people who worship together, regardless of their skin color, even their language barriers. In some cases, the worship transcends, those language barriers, even to some extent. But it is so stark in our country, the division, And so I think, George Floyd's death maybe, if I want to use a term, I say maybe has even exacerbated that to some extent.
Yeah.
Instead of bringing people together, as I thought it would have in the church, it's actually caused more division because of cultural differences, and to some extent political differences. So the Christian worldview that the church claims to have is not evident as it should be when you go into any given church on a Sunday morning. And I say, as a black male, that it's not only the white evangelical church, but it's also the black church, and it's the Hispanic church. It's every church. And so I think the church universal has a lot of work to do in that regard, because it seems like we are following the culture where we should be leading.
I would agree with that. It's funny. It's I grew up in a black church, but it was a real small black church, and the the youth group was me and my two brothers and these other three girls about the same age, and they were sisters, and that was our whole youth group. And so I didn't look at black or white church as just church I grew up in. But when I went to school, I was in the AP classes and all that. It was mostly white. There was maybe one or two other black people. So I was fine being around whoever back home. So when I came to college, I didn't know anybody. And so I didn't even think about, well, I got to find a black church. And I like you said, I was probably naive when I came like that too, because I was just thinking, I just want to go to a church. I knew I wanted to go to a Baptist church because that's what I grew up in. And I remember most people would never even know this, but I just literally walked, because I didn't have a car. And so I literally just walked down the street from the university to the first church I knew that was a Baptist church. It was really that, and it ended up being a huge white church. And so at first, I was kind of not thinking about it. And then I would go in the college service and sit all the way in the back pew by myself every single week. I didn't talk to anybody. I didn't, anything, because it was new to me, but I wasn't afraid of anybody. I think I was more thinking, what are they going to think about me being here? And I can say that now, but back then I didn't. And one day a man and his son came all the way back, and I mean, it was back there, and sat with me one Sunday. And then I remember one Sunday I was there, the pastor took me aside after church. He always would, say something to me when I would leave. And what impressed me is he didn't do it for a photo op. He wasn't trying to play up to, I'm going to shake the black guy's hand, and show it we're accepting and all that. He just privately took me in his office. No one to this day probably would even know that, and just talked to me about being welcome in his church. And he wanted me to know that from him. And so that's where I ended up going to church all my college years. And so when I found out, about a black church later, I was like, oh, and so you dealt with the whole, you didn't go to the black church. And, so, there's all those cultural things that dictate the things. People weren't happy that I actually got baptized and got saved. It was, why are you over there? And so for me, I had to really navigate a lot of that in college. But in George Floyd, I think it was so egregious and it was so in your face, and the callousness of it. And so all races in general were just shocked. And so from the Christian standpoint, like you said, I tell people all the time, you had a choice. Are you going to keep being a Christian through this? Looking at that, are you going to judge it from a Christian lens? Or will the pressure make you choose culture first or politics first and all those kind of things? And so I think as we go on, that's what ended up happening. And just like you said, you thought the church was going to lead or stand up together, but it wasn't. It's in the circles I'm in, it's more political. That drives it all, and the culture. And people that are not used to being around other people, they'll say, well, if you came, you're a exchange student from China or Africa, you can come to our church. But they haven't lived the Christ-like life in their church, and purposely have not. And so I work on Christian products every day, and I see it every day. So my challenge sometimes is to some of the people is that we don't think far enough ahead. Like I'm thinking, we all believe that we're going to heaven. So I always joke around and say, I want to have some popcorn sitting by the pearly gates, watching you explain to God which heaven you want to go to. It's like, can you point me to the white heaven? Can you point me to the black heaven? Can you point me to the Chinese heaven? I said, I would love to see that. I just asked God to let me watch that. Because I said, we're so short-sighted. The stuff we're doing now is not showing what we say we believe for our eternity.
Right.
So then, based on that, then what are some of the responses that you were seeing from church leaders or even church goers to Black Lives Matter?
Well, and I'm, kind of, I guess for me it's limited because I'm in one area here in Northwest Arkansas. And of course, we were both in Northwest Arkansas. I'm a little further north than Tony, but because of the virus and everything at this time, I'm not getting out much, and I haven't actually been to our church, but I'm only seeing what people I know from my church are posting on social media. And it just shocks me to some extent, the callousness of how they feel about what has happened. And, some of them, they don't know what to say. And I can give them that. They don't know how to respond. And they are so wrapped up in knowing what may happen to them if they actually speak out for what they know is right. Because they have family members who may be racist, and I'll use that term, loosely, but they may be racist and they grew up around that, and they don't want to sacrifice their family relationships or friendships for what they truly believe in. And so for that reason, some remain silent. They don't say anything. And then you have well, if Black Lives Matter, all lives matter. True. you know, which is back at them.
Mm.
And then you have, well, it's the Blue Lives Matter, you know, and the church at large seems to be avoiding the issue at hand, and is that there is blatant racism going on in this world, and where we should be leading, we're not. You know, we're looking to politics to solve these problems for us.
Yeah.
And I don't personally, you know, as a pastor, I don't think that's God's will. You know, um, and I say this, and it's funny when I think about it. God tried the law, and
Mm.
the law didn't work for him. So why do we think that we're going to make some laws that are going to fix these things for us? You know, it's a heart issue. It is a sin issue. It's a relationship issue. It's an integrity issue. You know, and it's all those things bundled into one. And you know, as a pastor, a former pastor, you know, it kind of irks me to some degree that the church is not taking a lead.
Mm.
And you know, I want to throw this out there, and it may be a little controversial, but you know, I really expected the white evangelical church to seize this opportunity to
Mm.
say, you know, this is who we actually are, and this is what we believe, and this is what we stand for. And you know, I saw maybe 15% of pastors actually do that, but those churches that those pastors did that, if you look at their congregation, the demographics of it, you know, they were largely multicultural, you
Mm.
know, so they had to say something in order to say that I'm just speaking what I really feel about that. I don't know if it was genuine or if it was to save the
Mm.
church. You know, I have to say something because, you know, maybe 45% of my members are people of color. You know, and I have people in my church who have interracial families and interracial marriages, and I don't want to be that pastor who is on the wrong side of history.
Mm.
So I need to say something, but I won't go as far as saying what really needs to be said, if you know what I mean in that regard. And so, you know, you have people who have platforms, very large platforms. You know, they have worldwide ministries, and their voices in this time could signal great change in what we've been seeing, especially coming from the church. But largely, they have been silent to protect themselves,
Yeah.
which goes directly against the gospel.
Mm.
Because if you try, the gospel says, if you try to save your life, then you're going to lose it. But if you lose your life for the gospel's sake, you know, for the things that are right, then you will save it. And so, you know, that's what I see as a pastor. Then I have to put myself in that, you know, in those pastor's shoes, you know, because I always talk about being empathetic, you know, towards people's situation. And I think, well, what if I was that pastor? You know,
Mm.
how hard would it be for me to cross that line and lose a lot of friends, maybe lose some members, maybe even lose my church altogether
Mm.
Mm.
because I said Black Lives Matter, even though I feel that way in my heart.
Mm.
And so, you know, that's a lot of ingredients in a mixing bowl, you know. But that's what I see, you know, from the outside. And I'm kind of thankful right now that I'm not pastoring because I get to look from the pew forward, having the perspective of a pastor and kind of play, you know, armchair quarterback. You know, you should be doing this and you should be saying that, you know, and all of it's true. And it may not be as easy as we think for them to do it, but it still has to be done.
Yeah. Tony, can you speak to that heart issue? Because I know that you're hearing some of these same sentiments.
We, you know, before George Floyd, you know, and there was a stirring up among white Christians that I know, and you know, and they would start groups and all this kind of stuff. And there was a group that was started almost 2 years ago, and it was a pastor, you know, and of a very large Methodist church, you know, and everything, and it was on his heart and all that. We've been to his house. We've had groups there come share testimony. I mean, a diverse people that would be in this living room, and then we started meeting at each other's church. Started Facebook groups, all this stuff. And then I remember the last thing I remember is them talking about the pushback starting from his church. And all of a sudden they were not wanting to hear. And he wasn't even the head pastor, but he was one of the teaching pastors. Well, we haven't talked to him in over a year now. And I thought to myself, wow, the pressure that you just like go against everything we had been working and building all these years, that all that time, and even some members from his church. And I mean, nothing, not a post, not a meeting, anything. And so now when you see what's going on now and how it's all escalated, as a African American guy, Black guy, you're going to wonder, was that real? Or was that just lip service so we could all kumbaya together and you could feel good about yourselves? Because I often
talking about a white pastor in your example.
Yes. And for me, I've said this, because I've worked in Christian circles for years and still do now, I always ask people, it's interesting to me that no one asks the actual African American person. If you're the only one there, it's a good resource, a good conversation you can have. Anytime somebody's even invited me to lunch in the past to talk about race before all this, it would be so they could tell me. It wouldn't be with the mutual respect of, I'm going to walk in your shoes and listen to you, because so I can understand better. It was, well, I'm going to show you, how you should think on this. And they've never experienced racism or dealt with any of that. And they don't even humble themselves to realize how that even looks. And so I know plenty of people since the George, Floyd thing you consider them super Christian. They consider themselves super Christians. They don't have a moment where they're not posting scriptures and what Jesus do and God and all this stuff. But it's very siloed and situational based on the subject. So when this happens, I always say this, that they know their husbands, wives, kids, pastors, co-workers, bosses are either racist or extremely prejudiced. They know. But like you said, it becomes a self-protection thing. I'm going to protect my church because I'm not going to lose my status and position over you. And so then it becomes the deflection points. Well, what about Chicago? Black people are always complaining about something. The fatherless homes is what the real problem is. It's not racism. Oh, they call everything racism. And so I've heard all of that. And like Tony said, you see the post from some of the people that you even in some ways looked up to as a Christian example, just shocking to you, because you've had conversations with them in the past. But this is what it comes to about your Christianity, when they used to say, when I was growing up, when the rubber meets the road.
Right. Now
we see, what are you really going to do? And then you have Jesus' example of gave up everything, to win everybody and went into any situation. But what we're seeing more and more and more is an unwillingness to do that. Where before, we were comfortable sending a check over here to this mission and everybody's adopting a kid from China or a kid from Africa, But there's a whole different thing when you have to sit down with somebody and talk to them and understand where they're coming from. And so I always tell people, even in my circles, imagine if you're sitting in a predominantly white church, a small church, and you've always been taught this, you've always been shown this. The only thing is what the media showed you. And all they do is show you Chicago, Baltimore, and the bad stuff that happens there day after day after day. And you've been conditioned to believe that everything about you as a white person is the best, the perfect. And when you see a Black person, they've committed a crime, they've shot somebody. You don't see the education, you don't see the art, you don't see the talent, you just see football players and athletes. A lot of the people know kneeling wasn't about disrespecting the flag. They know, but they don't want to have the discussion of what it's really about. So the deflection points just keep them from having the real discussion, because a lot of them that may not have seen the racism, there's still the majority of them that do know, have either done it, experienced it, know somebody who has done racist stuff, said racist stuff. It either gets chalked up as, oh, well, they were just joking. Oh, I always do this. And I see some of that in our society now is what we're dealing with. Well, I've always told that joke. Well, those statues have always been up. Well, we've always done it this way. Well, that didn't mean it was right. And then we'll take the gospel and say, this is what we should do. And I said, if we were talking about any number of other subjects, they would hammer you with the Bible. But when it comes to race, it's like, silence. And so what I see is a lot of people, they'll jump off of Facebook, they'll jump off of all social media to avoid it. And I said, and I joked around on Facebook one day, I said, well, they'll all be back when the conversation shifts to abortion. They'll all be back and be ready to talk and cry and weep over, you know, the lack of morals of it and all. But when it comes to race, it's like, we don't want to talk about it at all. And I just don't understand it.
And I just want to interject this, you know, as you were speaking, you know, to some extent, I think a very large extent, the church benefits from racism. And that is why you don't want to lose your base. That's where your power is.
Yes.
And, you know, if I continue to pander, you know, or step lightly on what I know my people believe,
Yes.
I could say words like discrimination or prejudice, but I won't say racist. So I'll say, you know, and I've seen a lot of pastors do that. You know, the Bible speaks, you know, about, you know, not showing favor or, you know, that kind of thing. But when are you going to actually stand up and say it is wrong? It is a sin. You know, it is a stench in the nostrils of God for you to hate your brother and sister because of skin color. And then as a you know, having a science background, just thinking the color of someone's skin has nothing to do with who that person is. I mean, it's just, you know, it seems to me like it's such a small-minded thing to point out, to look at that difference in any race of people, to think that, oh, because you have this color skin, that makes you 10 times more likely to commit a crime, or because you have this color skin, that makes you 10 times less likely to get a college degree. It has nothing to do, because similar to Tony, I've been in a lot of white spaces all my life. In fact, where I work at now, I'm a medical assistant in a family medicine practice, and I'm the only African American there. Besides the doctor and a nurse practitioner, I probably got the most education there. You know, and they talk down to me all the time because they feel like, yeah, you got this master's degree in biomedical science, but I've been doing this for 12 or 14 years, even though I've done this straight out of high school, and I, you know, have no other education. You know, there's little, I like to call it microaggression, I guess is the word.
Yes.
You know, just little subtle things that let me keep you in your place.
Yes.
You know, it's that sort of thing that you see every day. And so when you benefit from the system, you're very unlikely to speak out against it. So, you know, you get these things like, well, I wasn't a slaver. I didn't have slaves. I wasn't around, you know, during slavery. That's not my fault. But yes, you benefit from it. Even to this day, you know, our economy, today's economy that we have even now, the people who have the wealth, that all came from slavery. The people who are the landowners, that all came from slavery, you know, and it was based on cheap and free labor.
Yes.
And so now we've gotten to a point where this lie has been perpetuated for so long about African Americans and Black people that it's almost like it's ingrained in culture that, you know, Black people are inferior. And I see little white kids that pick that up very early in life without their parents saying to them, you are superior and African Americans are inferior. They pick it up by body language. They pick it up by how they see their parents twitch or turn or react when they, you know, come into contact with the Black person, or whether they smile or whether they wave, or, you know, I've seen parents, when their children are coming close to me, they call them and say, Susie, come over this way, come over by mommy, Susie, in the nicest way. But what that really means is get away from the Black man. I've seen, you know, parents grab their kids physically and pull them, you know, and I could have on a bow tie and glasses just like I do right now, and I get the same reaction. So, you know, if I had on jeans and a hoodie, it'd be worse, I imagine. And so, you know, when you benefit from that system and you see how that protects you, you know, and I know this word has become very contentious, but you do have this sort of privilege because of your skin, and they like to say, well, I don't have this privilege. I worked hard for the stuff I have. Well, I know you had to work hard. We all had to work hard, but you still had the advantage.
Yes.
You had a greater opportunity,
Yes.
and I had to work twice as hard.
Yeah.
And I say that from my vantage point today. Like I said, I have a master's degree in biomedical science, but I'm still an hourly worker. They won't give me a salaried position in the health system that I work in, regardless of my education.
But
when you benefit from that system, you feel like if I speak against that system, then I lose my power.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the fear, I think.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of power and control in it. Like you said, I've had these conversations even in my own office, and I use the example of my white coworker, and I said, we both could walk out in the hall, say the same thing, do the same thing, and it would be looked at one way for me and one way for her.
Right.
And those are the things, like you said, you navigate because, and I've had to explain before, like, oh, you should speak up, you should say this and you should say that. And I was like, me as a Black man, I can't do that. Every project I do, everything I work on, I know going into it, I have to do more. And of course, people around you say, oh, no, we wouldn't treat you like that. Yes, you would. Yes, you would, given the right situation. And then, like you said, I do hear a lot of, maybe poor white people that say, well, I wouldn't, I don't have any privilege at all. But I always tell them, I was like, you can go to a job, and whether you didn't follow through on your education or those kind of situations, you still had the opportunity going in. We go into situations, and then that racist guy that was always racist, his family was always racist, grandma was always racist, rises up the ranks, and then all of a sudden, he's the president of that company you're trying to interview with, and he sees your blackface come in there, and no matter what you say, what you have on, what you show them, your credentials, you're done. I said, you all at least get to come in there and show them and explain to them, so that if they don't choose you, they don't choose you because you're not qualified. They don't not choose you because you walked in the door and was the skin color they don't like. And so that's what's hard, trying to explain to them the difference. And it's like, oh, I don't have privilege. Oh, I didn't benefit. No, you did benefit. And, you working in companies, or when I was in church staff, you don't rise the ranks. Even churches, how they perpetuate it. You don't see a lot of Black men as teaching pastors, right? Really higher up in your church. They either relegate you to the choir leader, or you can become a deacon. And then, but the real decision making, they always make sure it stays white. And they won't say that. They're never going to say that. Companies are the same way. Government officials and administrations are the same thing. Depending on which president is in office, you see it. And so to make everybody feel okay, we're going to bring one person on or another person. And I actually just watched something this morning, a brief little segment on colorism. And what I thought was interesting, whether you're light skinned or dark skinned and stuff, but I love that they took it a step further and showed how even other races, Asian, Hispanics, how they look down on Black people. And there was a Asian girl that just straight up just said it in an interview. She said, we were always taught to not be like the Black people, to not use that, because she said, not because they were actually scary, but because it would get them more access to white situations and white circles. And she said, we knew that was our key in. So we were always shown that. So imagine you're looking at this 20-something-year-old saying, we were actually taught that, and it was not, oh, well, we hate Black people. It was just, we knew how they are viewed. So we were shown to be this way. And I see it all the time. I can go places now where I'm working, and Hispanic people are jump, and they're scared of you. And so I tell people, what I started doing a few months ago was watching the news. And I watched the local news. I used to tell my wife, I said, how I could always tell if the person that committed that crime was a Black person or not? I said, because they're going to put that picture up there first. And it's going to be the craziest looking picture they can find. And they're going to tell you everything about, with George Floyd, same thing. They'll dig into your past, how bad you were. He must have done something. He must have. And so I said, when I watch the news, when I notice it's not a black person, how I know is because 9 times out of 10, they won't even mention the race. When they give the description, they'll say he was 5 foot, whatever, driving this, and you're like, where's the picture? Where's the picture? And so I started noticing that pattern. You're going to see a Hispanic picture, and they're going to play that for several days. They're not going to just give that a quick blurb that one evening. It's going to be bringing it back up every day. When you see the local news, everything that's happening in the country and the world, but they're going to go straight and give you some violent story in Chicago. They're going to tell you that first. That happened today. And I thought, they're talking about this shooting in Chicago and all this other stuff happened. And so what I said was, I started going to their websites. And so all of a sudden you see all these white news and all these Chinese, and I said, what? And I mean, egregious stuff. And you're going, they didn't lead with this at all. But they were leading with this black guy, this Hispanic guy. And I mean, that has become a consistent pattern that I've seen, even in the local news. And I tell people, so I would tell people in my office, you've been conditioned all your life to believe everything white is good and everything black is bad or Hispanic is bad. They're criminals, they're evil, they're aggressive, they're all this stuff. And so I go into every situation, whether I'm in a store or a department store, I have to sift through, is this clerk coming up to me trying to honestly help me, or are they following me to make sure I don't steal something? And so I have to watch how I dress, watch how I talk, watch how, if I disagree with something in a meeting, don't show too much emotion, don't get too mad, because that'll be used against you. And so sometimes they'll say, oh, you don't have to do that. You don't. Yes, I do. You don't think I have to. But as we're seeing with George Floyd, there's a lot of talk about this is what we're about. But when it comes down to it, and now you have a situation where you have a true situation to show your Christianity, people chose culture, chose politics, chose getting in certain circles to accomplish things because it benefits, like Tony said, it benefits you to be that way. There's a lot of churches, it benefits you to have this person in charge and not have that person. It benefits you to bring alongside somebody so you can look like you're really ministering and all this kind of stuff, and you're parading around these programs. It benefits you to do that. And I have seen over and over in my life where when it came down to it, they dropped you just like that. And nobody's sorry. Nobody's worried about it. Nobody's, well. And I think so when people see stuff as egregious as George Floyd, they have to put it into some context of, well, he must have done something. Well, it never is. It's just wrong. Right. It's just wrong. We have to quantify it and hope that person has a clean background, because they're going to go there first. And I told somebody this the other week in my office. An officer got shot in Tulsa. And on the news, all they were talking about was Chicago and all the violence in Chicago and Atlanta. And I said, but when they talked about mentioned the blurb about the guy in Tulsa, I kept looking it up and following the story. But what happened was, it was a white guy that shot him. And it was a random, like literally he had pulled him over and the guy just shot him, killed him. And I said, when that happens, the thing you see what the media will do is when it's a white person, they'll change the narrative. The narrative will now become the heroic cop that lost his life. Blue lives matter. We should back the blue and all this. But when it's a black man that does it, they're out here criminal and wild and, gun crazy and violent crazy. And they will show the pictures left, right. And you don't hear as much about the victim. You hear them as a whole, as a cop. The black guy shot a cop. But when it's a white person, it becomes every story. They won't even mention the white guy. They won't dig in his background. They won't talk about all this stuff he's doing. It'll be the heroic cop and he's hero. And that becomes the narrative. But people don't slow down long enough to look at that. They just eat it up. They don't know that history books were literally rewritten in the South to fit certain narratives. So imagine you think you're learning history because we're still, hundreds of years later, still talking about Columbus, still discovering everything. We don't talk about the Native Americans, that we came and killed these people. We won't talk about that. I've had men that used to go to my multicultural church recently, on Facebook. Well, I just feel like all white people are being blamed. That's what he said after my post, that I shared some stuff and a lot of people responded to it in great ways. He didn't even deal with the racism of the real story I told him of what happened to me in Dillard's. He didn't talk about any of that. His whole post, after everything everybody said, was, well, I just feel like right now, white people are getting blamed as a white man. I feel that way. And he goes, do you think so? Be fair, is what he said. And my response to him was, welcome to how we feel every day. And he's just I was like, and the fact that you had to say, be fair, and we've been fighting for equality all this time, and you didn't even touch on the fact this actually happened to a black man, and you couldn't even touch that. It had to be about your victimization.
Right.
Or perceived.
When you say that, and that's your story, but there are so many Tony Newtons out there.
Yeah.
And there's so many of those stories, we get numb to it.
Yes.
Because it happens so much. I know when I go in Dillard's, they're going to say the magic number is 500. I know what that means. Wow. Because I've heard it so much, and I can immediately, I know which way they're coming from. I could just really just turn around and look at them.
Yep.
Walking in my direction.
Yes.
And it gets to the point, where you get desensitized to it. It's like the norm. I don't want to get mad because I know what's going to happen when I go in here. I just want to go look at shirts, look at ties, and leave.
Yeah.
I know they're going to send security, over there, plain dress, plain clothes. I already know who the person is. Yes. He's been the same guy for the last 6 years. He doesn't work in the suit department. He wears a suit, but he doesn't work in the suit department. He just walks around the men's department and, hangs out until they say the magic number is 500. I'm 500. I know that, and so it's so many of those stories that are untold. And for me, it's like, you get to a point of exhaustion.
Yes.
You're just exhausted that, if I have on a pair of sweats and a t-shirt and I need to run out to Walmart and get something, I got to change clothes. I just cannot go in Walmart with a pair of sweats on and a t-shirt. Exactly. I have to change clothes so people won't fear me.
Exactly.
So I have to do what's necessary to make other people feel comfortable in those spaces so that I can take the burden off myself of being looked at the wrong way, And then what comes behind that is I have a black son. I have to raise him and teach him that, where other cultures don't have to do that. So I have to tell him, look, if this happens, to you, respond this way. If that happens, respond this way. He's 6 years old. But, you can't act out. You can't have a bad day. You can't be frustrated in class. Because if you do, they're going to want to separate you and say, you're a behavioral problem. Yes. Another kid can get upset and snatch a crayon from another little boy. But if you snatch a crayon, you're being violent.
Yes.
And so I have to teach my 6-year-old, you can't be like a normal 6-year-old because you're black. And so as a father, it just seems like, for me, and I understand the culture that I live in, and I'm pretty sure, it's a whole lot easier for me today than it was for my father or his father before me, but it shouldn't be that way. And, bringing that back to the church, he shouldn't have to grow up in an environment, in a church environment, where he feels like he's separate from all the other kids. And, Tony and I are both up here in Northwest Arkansas. We both go to predominantly white churches. And so for him, he's the only person of color in his class at church and maybe at school also. Wow. And so as a 6-year-old, he's already seeing the differences where he should just be living a normal 6-year-old life, playing in the dirt, wrestling with other boys. I have to tell him, if somebody picks you up and throws you on the ground, you have to tell the teacher. You can't pick them up and throw them on the ground, even though y'all are both playing, because if he tells the teacher on you first, you're going to get sent home. you know, and he doesn't understand that. And I have to try to explain that to a child whose mind isn't even mature enough, isn't supposed to be mature enough at his age to understand that, you
Mhm.
know? And so it's those types of things, and we have to remind ourselves constantly, and I do too, even as a pastor, that it is a spiritual battle, because it's so easy to get pulled into the worldly battle that it is. But we have to remind ourselves that it is a spiritual battle. We do have a devil who hates us. We do have a devil who hates unity. We do have a devil who understands that if the church really becomes the church,
Yeah.
that the things that he tries to throw against us, those weapons, they're not going to work. The devil understands that. But we are the church. We quote that scripture all the time, but we get hit by the same trick. And we've been getting hit by the same trick for thousands of years, and it's still working.
Yes.
I've seen pastors preach on it, and the devil's still doing the same thing. So at some point, you have to take your authority, your spiritual authority, and use it in the world to overcome what's going on. So you can't always say, well, the problem is sin, and just leave it at that. Well, yeah, the problem is sin, but there's some racists out there too.
Yes.
Yes, it's a sin problem. Well, no, it's a heart issue. And if people would just have love in their hearts, well, people have love in their hearts. They have love for who they want to love. So
Mm.
we still have to deal with that issue too. Well, it's not really a black white thing. It's about the culture and how I was raised. Well, at some point, you're responsible for how you think and how you act.
Yes.
At some point, you rebelled against your parents for the things that you shouldn't have rebelled against. Why can't you rebel against this? You know, when your parents didn't want you to wear makeup when you were 12, you got upset and you rebelled. Well, why can't you rebel against racism? And so, we have a lot of work to do in the church, as lay people in the pews.
Mhm.
But essentially, it starts from the head down. And you have to hear words of affirmation from the head. It's got to come down from the leadership. You have to have
Yes.
a pastor who's bold enough to stand in that pulpit and say, hey, flat footed, this is what I believe. If you are racist in your heart, that is wrong. If you have these thoughts about Black people, African Americans, people of color, that is wrong. And as a pastor, I will not support it.
Mhm.
Mhm.
And I will not support you, not in that type of thinking, not in that type of treatment towards people, because it's not right. And when you are a pastor or somebody in leadership and you can't do that, then you become complicit, because that, it's almost like silence is acceptance.
Mhm.
You can't say, well, you just need to go in your prayer closet and pray and see what the Lord's going to say. We already know what the Lord has said. He's put it in the book.
Yeah.
We can't fall on that. Well, we're just going to let the anointing cover it. I've seen anointed racists, you
Mhm.
know, and so we try to over spiritualize things that God has given us the power to deal with. He says, in Genesis, he gave us dominion. Let him have dominion
Yeah.
over all these things, the fish, the birds, the fowl, everything that creepeth. He gave us dominion over that. So, we keep saying, well, if my people who are called by my name, let's humble themselves. I heard that scripture 1,000 times. And yes, that is all true. But God has an expectation of us who have this power. We have power to speak to the situation. As Tony said, we have power to have some meaningful, impactful conversations that don't turn into an argument about your culture versus mine. you know we have the power to do that, and I think God is literally just sitting back with his arms folded,
Mm.
waiting on us to do it.
Mhm.
Jesus is not going to come down from heaven on a white horse with a sword and solve our problems. He's
Exactly.
given us the power to do that.